Good Wednesday to you, everybody in COM 831. Welcome to week boom, bam, 11. We are what now? Week 11 is 5 weeks from the end of the semester. Whoo. Uh, but to persevere, and so do I. Mm. Now, sufficiently caffeinated. Okay, welcome to the week. Daylight savings. Woo. So everybody fell back over the weekend. Yeah, hope your bodies are adjusting. I keep hearing tantalizing talk about doing away with daylight savings. I would approve that message. Um, but we'll see. Okay, this week we're going to take a little detour, if you will. Instead of reading the uh, text, the Schmidt and Cohen text, I'm going to give you the opportunity to read some research that was designed to test some of the assumptions laid out in the text, namely my research. Yeah, that was quite a buildup. Some years ago, I was reading Schmidt and Cohen, and I thought, I've seen social media, other forms of digital media, internet connective technologies, ICTs, used in a lot of interesting places. I was at that time running my own international humanitarian media company. I go on to work in something like 27 countries. And I'd seen social media in some out of the way places, but I wasn't seeing the transformative effect um, at the level that Schmidt and Cohen were saying that, especially social media, that it was going to bring to be impacting the people. And I thought, okay, you know, I mean, my experience isn't the whole planet, not even by a long shot. Maybe I'm missing something. So why don't we design a study in which we ask, especially those distressed peoples of the world that Schmidt and Cohen claim that internet connective technology in general and social media in particular uh, was going to enable to solve their problems and feel connected and have lots more free time and be deeper thinkers and have more meaningful relationships and so on and so forth. So I constructed, and then conducted a study in which I asked a group of Christian refugees being held in a refugee camp in Iraq. First, did they use social media? Secondly, did they see it as a tool to resolve their most pressing problems? And third, how did it make them feel? In other words, I just put to the test, at least in that context, the claims that Schmidt and Cohen, I just had to adjust my chair, Schmidt and Cohen were making in their text. So I'm gonna, not because I did the research, but I'm going to give you the opportunity. I'm going to ask you to read through some of my research, and then I'll give you some questions to kick around. They're concerning. Okay. Also, this week, the third, yesterday, your technology tool was due. Some of you have not turned it in. Some of you, reached out to me after the fact and said, hey, I realize I haven't turned this in, but please, just, I mean, for nothing else but common courtesy, let me ask and encourage you. If you don't have something done, and you know you're not going to have it done because probably it's not 7 o'clock on a Monday, on the day that it's due, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have it done. Your communication majors, communicate with me before the deadline. All right. Remember, the option to remove points because of late work is always there. I am most interested in your best work. And part of your best work is you exercising your communicative muscles and your skills and saying, hey, this is what's going on. Because, and I say some of you, actually, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you haven't turned the assignment in. Get on top of that. Okay. This week, I have just changed my schedule. I'm traveling to a conference. I'll leave on Thursday. I will be out of the office because it's a traveling day on Thursday. And I'll be out of the office most of the day on Friday. Now, through the rest of the week, that is the coming week, the 10th through the 14th, I won't be keeping my regular in-office hours, but I will be available, to answer your questions and follow up with stuff. I know some of you, I had a chance to talk. We've talked over Zoom about your papers. And if there's follow-up for that, hit me by email and I will have the opportunity to get back to you. All right. I'll be back, actually butt in the chair on the 18th, but I won't have dropped completely off the grid except for Thursday because that's the travel day. Okay. And then Friday, I'll have a limited window to answer questions and give you input. Now, don't, please don't, when we've talked about your papers, I can't read like a whole rough draft. If you have questions about addressing the stuff that we discussed, great. Send me those questions with specific examples. Don't send me large text to proofread because that's send that to each other. Work as a cohort. You want to develop that collegiality. I have a little bit of time in the morning on Wednesday, that is tomorrow, November the 5th. If you absolutely need to speak with me, let's do it then. Okay. And I think I sent a little note to one of you saying, hey, why don't we talk during that time? Okay. So that's coming up for this week. Okay. Let's take a look back at the questions from Schmidt and Cohen from last week. See what you had to say. See if we can add anything to help round out your understanding thereof. Question number 1, do you agree with that social media are substantively changing the nature of revolutions, both at home and abroad? Please support your answer by providing a link to academic research. Okay, now a couple of things for this question. Number 1, things like data and media, these are implicit in the plural. When we say the data are, we should, when you construct that in a sentence, okay? And then secondly, the reason that I'm asking for links to academic research is that, remember, as researchers, it's our moral duty to ask important questions and then to objectively answer them, not based on our hunches and our experiences alone, but based on our evaluation of the data that's been generated by lots of other people's hunches and experiences. The main task that you have at hand is one primarily of process. You're learning how to identify good data from junk. And, since you have like information about the whole world, literally the portal to that in the palm of your hand, it's a sea of information that's choked with crap, with garbage. So get into the habit. See, this is one of the ironies and one of the effects of this digital environment. It flourishes on the opinionated expressions of the users. I mean, that's the meat and potatoes of what is the World Wide Web now. Now, interestingly, when it first came about, that was not the beating heart of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web is the content that's on there. Okay, the beating heart of the World Wide Web were sources, databases of information that you could go into and look stuff up, not what somebody had to say about X, Y, and Z. In fact, the first search engines, and Google was an early search engine. I mean, it came after things like Netscape. The original name for Google was Backrub. Yeah, I know, weird sounding, but it was, they picked that name because the idea was you asked a question, and then the search engine Google Backrub went backwards through the data to see who had asked that question and or come up with an answer that was similar to the question that you were answering. So if you had typed in the early days, what's 2 plus 2, Backrub would have gone back to find databases stored on the internet in which 2 plus 2 had an equal, and then looked at how many times those who put the databases together said equal 4, equal 3, equal 5. And if the majority said 2 plus 2 equals 4, that's what you get. So it used to be that the heart and soul, the purpose of the internet was to find the way back to an authoritative, by way of repetition, sources to the answer to your question. Not anymore. The irony is that the World Wide Web is dominated by the opinion of people, and as such, it encourages you, me, as a user, to input opinion, and this is the tricky part, to mistake opinion for fact. Now, opinion can be grounded in fact. Opinion can be grounded in experience that comes from a fact, something that happened, but one's experience does not necessarily line up with the facts in toto about a phenomenon. So your task, your process, is to figure out how to get past the opinion. And unfortunately, this tendency to insert opinion for fact is like everywhere. And in academics, it's even there. Shouldn't be, but hey, I mean, I know we're cool, you included, but we're just people. You have to go back to a source, and when you go back to a source, look at the data, look at how they got it, how much of it is, how did they analyze it, and then what conclusions did they draw from it. That's why I have you cite a source, not just because I need another link in there to look at. Okay. Please support your answer by providing a link to academic research. Okay. Sarah, let's take a look at you. You went last, in fact, just this morning. Sarah says, in short, yes, I do think social media is changing the nature of revolutions, both in the US and around the world. Platforms like X, Instagram, TikTok make it easier for people to access information, share personal stories from the ground, call others to action in real time. Venezuela found that social media can directly increase protest participation because people aren't just consuming content, they're expressing opinions and mobilizing others through their network. This creates a kind of a digital spark. Interesting language. That's nice. That can turn into a real world movement faster than traditional organizing could. So while revolutions still require on the ground action, the way they spread, gather support, gain visibility is definitely being reshaped by social media. And then you have this article about Venezuela unpacking the use of social media for protest behavior. Yeah, this is a true statement. Social media is changing the nature of revolution, but it's also changing the nature of how governments are able to respond, because rulers of these states, whether it's Venezuela or somewhere else, are not just like all sitting around going, how is it that the people know how to get together all in one place? They're monitoring them. They're using the same tools to watch what they're doing, predict where they'll be, and bam, send a response. So yeah, it's changing revolution in a lot of ways. not just those who do it. Okay. And then, how that is, that could be an interesting research topic. All right, question number 2. Stopping terrorism has been a primary strategic goal for U.S. foreign policy based on Chapter 5. What is the U.S. doing poorly, and what is it doing well regarding the use of new technology to stop terrorism? And this is, I realize there's, a lot here that you could pick from, so I'm not looking for a singular answer. Okay, Janae, let's take you. You went just this afternoon. In the chapter, Schmidt and Cohen point out that advanced tools like data tracking, surveillance systems, digital analytics have really improved how the U.S. identifies and stops potential threats before they happen. The ability to analyze online behavior and communication patterns gives agencies a clearer picture of how terrorism groups operate, which definitely helps prevent attacks. At the same time, this is a good point, the U.S. hasn't done well with balancing national security and personal privacy. Schmidt and Cohen talk about how widespread surveillance has raised a lot of ethical and trust issues, especially when it comes to spying on citizens or allies. In 2025, I would say public trust is even lower all around. I think that's where the U.S. still has a lot of work to do. Okay, I think that's a fair observation. I think and I'm not, I have my opinion on this, but I'm not, for the sake of our discussion, I'm not taking a side, one side or another. I think, though, it is academically prudent to ask, can the use of these tools to prevent terrorism be done without the other prying into personal privacy? And the reason I think that that's an important question is because those who commit acts of terror, and we can look at terrorism in the classically defined sense, that is acts of violence meant to disrupt or frighten the public in order to initiate or advance political change. I mean, that's the classic definition of terror. Okay. I mean, one of the ways, for instance, that this works, that this plays out, is terrorists disrupt the lives of people. They blow up buses and things as a means by which to demonstrate to the people that their government cannot protect them, and it breaks the trust between the people and the government, and it causes instability. Okay, but anyway, because in a lot of instances, those that would terrorize a citizenry, I think I used this side, live amongst the citizens. How do you find them? Can you keep an eye on them, that is, identify them and track what they're doing without prying into people's privacy? Because one of the hallmarks of a predator, that is something that grabs a prey item, whether it's an animal or something besides a human being, is camouflage. They don't like stand out here and advertise like, oh, hey, look, terrorists over here. They work hard to blend in and disguise themselves. So the question is, can you find them without looking into everybody and all their stuff? I think that is a question that needs to be explored. Okay. Question 3, Schmidt and Cohen suggest that cyber warfare will overtake conventional warfare. Do you agree? Please explain why or why not. Emily, I agree that cyber warfare will become more prevalent and might even become more common than physical warfare. However, I disagree with the idea that it would replace physical warfare completely. While cyber warfare is becoming easier to engage in and remain safer for the hacker, or we could say, the aggressor, the combatant. Part of war is to dominate. Granted, gaining power over the cyber world that includes private and crucial information can be a form of domination. That being said, I think the very safety that cybersecurity offers the hackers, the reason that conventional warfare won't fade away. Unfortunately, hate is real. We've got a lot to unpack in here. With that hate is the desire to hurt. Not necessarily. There can only be so much hurt caused through cyber warfare. Even without hate, there's a desire to neutralize threats and protect against cyber warfare. Can only go so far to neutralize, protect without getting physical. Okay, and and I picked yours, Emily, not to pick on you because it was representative of where a lot of people were. Now, I think that the coin is still in the air as to whether it's heads or tails, whether it will or will not replace conventional warfare. If for any of you, if this interests you, take a look at what's going on and what sort of developments have been coming into play in the war between Ukraine and Russia, because there you are seeing an interesting, I hate to sound so analytical when you're talking about death and mayhem, but you're seeing an interesting blend of cyber and conventional weapons. Cyber primarily in pre-programmed drones that swarm and attack targets, and those could be persons or places like power plants, and just blow them all to bits. Okay, but the conventional part in that these drones carry explosives. I mean, some of these drones are they're programmed and they look for movement. This is just the program, what they do. And they have literally conventional mortars, bombs strapped to them, and when they're hovering around, and when they find them, they release the mortar, and it goes bang. So it's a weird blend. Let me go back to a couple things that you said, though, because again, this sentiment seems to be shared by a lot of people. Okay, hate is real. Again, no hate, Emily. I want to discourage folks from sort of take this this critique, Emily, in the way that it's meant. Avoid these kind of tropes. Okay, I don't know what that tells me, or your readers. Hate is the desire to hurt. I hate you. I just, for instance, I live in a state where, let me put it this way. I live in a state where I'm allowed to carry and conceal a force multiplier, if you understand what I mean. I don't hate anybody. And I do not want to use a force multiplier that I conceal. I think what's the internet term? A pew pew on my persons, but I will, not because I hate anybody, but because my life and the life of my family is worth more than the perpetrator who might be trying to harm me or them. And the place I live, the laws under which I live, allow me to apply repetitive force, pew pew pew, until that threat is no longer a threat. And that's actually, there's fairly wide bandwidth that I get to decide how much of not a threat is not a threat. Don't hate anybody. But back to your answer. Let's see. Cyber warfare is cheaper, faster. Oh, sorry. Hackers hate, desire. There can only be so much hurt caused through cyber warfare. Now, here, this is an interesting question too. This might be an interesting topic for people to dig into, because let's say, for instance, through a cyber attack, an enemy caused the very caustic and dangerous cleaning chemicals that are used to make water drinkable. They're used in small amounts, but since you're dealing with a lot of water in most municipalities, these chemicals are stored in large quantities, that they used a hack to cause the release of large amounts of those chemicals into the water system, and therefore poisoned tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Or they just shut the power off in the middle of winter and, freeze everybody to death on a regional scale, much larger than you could do with any weapon, conventional weapon. So this might be an interesting area of, scholarly exploration. Okay, Good answer. Question number 4. In your opinion, but drawing on your readings this week, do new media technologies help or hinder conflict resolutions among competing groups within nations like Jews and Palestinians in Israel, or Hindus and Muslims in India? And I picked those because these are, in recent weeks, days, weeks, months, and years, these have been flashpoints of conflict. Okay. Valerie, new technologies has created both exciting opportunities and significant challenges for conflict resolution between opposing groups. On the one side, digital platforms can make communication easier, amplifying minority voices, opening up previously in unreached areas for interaction. Scholars note social media facilitates rapid information sharing, et cetera, et cetera. However, research shows that new media often worsens divisions, ignorance, hostility, and threatening peace efforts. Yeah. And that's actually, if you look at, say, the Israeli-Palestinian problem, okay? I mean, I just don't know how much more blatant an attack could be than the October 7th attack. I mean, when you paraglide into a music festival and start eliminating and kidnapping people who are I mean, not sure, not a crowd of combatants. This is a daylight rave. It's like, come on, okay, that is hostility in the purest form. One of the I was going to say unspoken, but no, one of the acknowledged rules of warfare is if a government, if any government that claims to represent a people commits an act of war, the acts to counter that act of war, to counter that aggression, are going to be aimed at the people, because governments are not, like alien cliques that live behind the moon and suddenly come to Earth at a particular place and time, amongst Palestinians in 2024 or Germans in 1930, that come from the people. And it's considered fair game to inflict suffering on the people while you're fighting that government. And that's how the war between the Palestinians and the state of Israel has progressed. But it's interesting to note how the dialogue, if that's one way to put it, within the public has progressed. That it almost, it seems, I think you can make a reasonable case that this was just an inexcusable and unprovoked attack, even if it had been provoked, a type of attack with such ferocity that deliberately targeted civilians, that in targeting the government that organized that attack, if there are civilians that are damaged, that's the price that is going to be paid. I'm not pitching this as a thing that should be done and multiplied. I'm saying this is how warfare works. But given that, it's interesting to look at how social media has been used to present the particulars of the conflict. And I think if you look across a number of platforms, you don't see that black and white. In fact, you can look back historically, and even if you look at conflicts that at least now in retrospect, appear black and white, the conflict between the United States and Imperial Japan after the attack on Pearl Harbor. There was considerable and growing public discomfort over how the war was unfolding, especially the bombing, the firebombing of cities like Tokyo. And, there were a number of people that were saying, yeah, should we be doing this? And I know there's a film recently that has, if it's not out already, I think it's out soon, called Nuremberg, that takes a look at the the trials following the defeat of Nazi Germany and the putting on trial of the remaining leaders of that government. One of the objections that was made, and not just by those who were being put on trial, but by members of the countries that were victorious, like Great Britain, the United States, and France, was like, oh, hey, wait a minute. There's never been any laws that say you can't do all these things during war. How is it that we're going to put these people on trial? And again, I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't have been put on trial. Okay. But what I am suggesting and what I'm saying to you is that public sentiment over how a conflict is unfolding does not always align with the historical facts of how it came about and how it's unfolding. And I think it's an interesting topic, something, maybe someone wants to dig into, is how our social media applications or internet connective technologies shaping that perception. Okay. That ebb and flow. Okay. Good answers, everybody, one and all. Okay. We're out of time. If you haven't gotten those technology tool pieces in, you need to get them in. Okay. Because I'm stacking up, folks, with work to do. Okay. I'll be in the office tomorrow morning. If you've gotten a note from me like, hey, maybe we should chat, please respond, and I'll use that time to talk with you. Otherwise, all right, I'm out on Thursday. I'm out Thursday and Friday. I'll be back, looking at email on Friday, but no office hours during this Friday. That is November, what is that going to be? The 7th. Okay. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Remember that I think about you, I pray about you, and I will see you on Canvas. Take care. Bye-bye.